on the agenda is actually two at the same time. 22-799, Mr. Ryan Brown on behalf of Rosewood Developers, and also 22-800. These two plots are directly next to each other on Ale Court in Centerport. Mr. Brown?
Well, I'm actually...
You're filling in for Mr. Brown.
I am filling in for Mr. Brown, who works for me. So it's the law office of John Breslin, again, 44 Elm Street, Huntington. And we're actually representing Rosewood Developers, the principal of which is Mr. Anthony Porco, who is sitting in the audience behind me. Mr. Porco is a longstanding developer, has built many, many homes in the town of Huntington and elsewhere, but most notably, he's built 3 other houses on Ale Court, which is a small residential street that extends off Mead in the hills of Centerport. It dead ends, as you can see from the aerial and the cursor that's being utilized, right at a point of one of the subject lots. The road would be extended to develop the easterlymost lot that is being shown right there. And the westerly lot, you can see them outlined with the in gold. Those are the 2 properties that we're seeking to develop. The 3 houses that you see there are the ones that were previously built by Mr. Porco on the subject street. The only relief that we're here for tonight is for retaining walls. As like the prior case before, and in Centerport, we have many applications for retaining walls. The most common is for the aggregate size of the retaining walls. As you've heard me many times say, the ordinance has no bearing on the nature of the property, and the aggregate component really doesn't make any sense. But with respect to this particular development that's proposed, the applicant and their engineer and their surveyor, Mr. Fauser, went to great lengths to minimize the impacts on the hillside by designing one, if you will, box or rectangle into the hillside for the development of the 2 properties. And that box, if you will, is what gives rise to some of the area variances that are being sought and the setbacks for the retaining walls. So in addition to the aggregate retaining wall requirements that we're seeking, we're also seeking some area variance for setbacks for the retaining walls. And those are 0 setbacks with respect to the interior lot lines between the 2 lots, because we're creating a retaining wall that bisects the property along the back. I don't know if do you have the composite map that shows both the lots together? Not with the walls? No, that's just one of them. Yeah, so if you envision, can you go back to that one? So that's the westerly lot, and you can see the proposal calls for the retaining wall to be 5 feet from its westerly boundary, which is one of the requested variances. That condition is exactly the same thing that exists on the property to the west of that. And then the other area variance retaining wall is for the 0 setback where it crosses the property line right there. On the property to the east, we have the exact same relief that we're seeking for that property, the 0 setback where it crosses, and in that case, we're seeking a 5-foot setback where it abuts a conservation easement that exists on the subject property. So it's not abutting a neighbor's property, it's abutting our own property. That 75-foot wide swath of our property is a conservation easement. So the setback variance is to our own conservation easement. So the only relief on that lot is for aggregate and 5 feet on the interior side, as well as the 0 for the wall that crosses the property line. I hope I explained it correctly. In all other respects, the lots conform, including the size of the footprints in this steep slope ordinance. The lots are substantially oversized for the R7 zone. And of course, in the applicant will have to go through the engineering process in building the houses to make sure the walls conform to all the engineering specifications. We did receive a letter from an attorney who represents the property owner to the north, who had indicated a concern with respect to runoff and drainage. And I had written back and explained that with respect to those issues, the applicant has two different sets of burdens to meet in the development of this property. And that is, during the construction process, they have an obligation to mitigate runoff during construction as one component part of any type of development in a hillside area. And the second part is they have an obligation to maintain any water on the subject property, which would be something that would not exist today. In addition, they will also have a third thing that I didn't think of at that time is by the installation of the extension of the roadway, there would be the ability, in addition to the drainage on the property, also for drainage structures and design within the roadway to ensure that there be no further water that would be extending to the north or to affect any property owners. So I think that from a drainage and runoff point of view, the neighbor and neighbors can be adequately protected through the regulations that the town has. Under the standards of 267, there is no other way for the applicant to develop the property without relief from the strictures of the steep slope ordinance because of the contours that exist. It is something that's regularly granted by this board. Included in my materials are a number of cases where the board has granted this type of relief. The conditions exist in the immediate neighborhood, in fact, next door to the property that was developed. Those houses were built prior to the enactment of the ordinance, so they didn't fall under the same regulations. It's certainly not going to have an adverse impact on the character of development. It's consistent with it. It's certainly consistent with and will not impact property values. Those are single-family houses consistent with what was built in the neighborhood. And the applicant, in order to develop the site, will have to comply with all of the town's regulations and engineering specifications to make sure that the hillside is protected and drainage and runoff are contained. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Breslin. I think it probably goes without saying that, you know, your client would be constrained to follow any of the building and engineering department regulations with respect to water runoff or any kind of surface water, and since you're going to have to extend the road if this application is granted, that there could be some kind of drainage that would go into the street or the road, whether it's dry wells or whatever the engineering department might require of your applicant. True?
That's correct.
All right. Is there, we did have at least one and perhaps two persons. We did get some letters on it. As Mr. Breslin has pointed out, the most critical thing was drainage and not seeing that any water other than what already exists would be introduced to any other property. I think Mr. Breslin's indicated that that's not going to happen, but I'd like to hear from anybody who has something they'd like to present to us with regard to this application.
Mr. Chairman, before the public comes up, would you rather have us wait? I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask.
You can ask them now. Thank you.
Okay. Only, as you've been up to the site, it's incredibly steep, and I guess this is going up the hill even steeper. So I'm not a geometry expert, but I know the steep slope code bases it on the percent of grade, you know, how much it goes up. So I didn't see the percent of grade. Do you know?
It was 14%. It was over 14%. So the grade, the steep slope applied. I think the calculation was on the survey.
So, well, I didn't. I know there's brackets, like 10 to 14 being the lower, and over 25% being the highest. And like I said, I'm not a geometry expert, but this is some of the steepest land in Huntington, so I would think you'd be closer to the top. But I was looking, Mr. Dunham, who just had an application across the street in Centerport, you know, much flatter, he submitted what I'm used to seeing, which is the calculation from the planning department that would have that all. And maybe it's in here, but I didn't see the planning department's similar calculation that said, I saw your engineer said you're allowed 445, and you have 5 times that much. You're asking for 5 times that much. You want 2,200 square feet.
On one of the lots,
On one of the lots. The other one, you're allowed
17.
445, and you're
It's for-
asking 1,800, almost 400% what's allowed. It's a tremendous. So, again, I saw the engineer's work, but I didn't see, the plan, our planning board normal paper that attests to that.
test
So
to
the-
which, test to which? I'm not following.
That calculation is, your engineer does it, but our planning people sign off on it. Okay, that's the standard. I forget the name of the form. Mr. Dunham just gave it to us when he was up here before. It's called Department of Engineering Checklist. And you submit the numbers, and they use that, but then obviously they attest to those numbers, and then we weigh in. I've got some questions on whether we've ever granted 500% relief. Maybe we have, but
Well,
before we even got to that, I just wanted to know.
You ask a question, then you don't give me a chance to answer it.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, in the materials I gave you, you have numerous cases where you've granted similar relief. You've granted it numerous times. And the percentage really doesn't make any difference because the code doesn't make any sense. And there's a perfect example
I'll
of
let
it.
you answer.
There's a perfect example of it with respect to these two properties. The requirement is exactly the same thing for both lots. They're different sizes, they're different slopes. The requirement's the same thing. Now, how is that possible that the requirement's the same thing for both lots when they're different? That's why it doesn't make any sense. Doesn't take into account the slope, the size of the lot, doesn't make any sense.
So, and I realize you've never liked this law, but it is
It's
the
not a
law.
question of not liking it. It
You don't
doesn't.
think it's fair, but
It's not a question of fair. It doesn't make any engineering sense.
but it is, so my question was, the same checklist the previous applicant gave that we're used to seeing, which is how they calculate it. It does matter whether it's 10%, as you said, and like I said, at some of the steepest land in Huntington. I think it's going to be higher, but I'm a layman, so that's why we have a planning department.
Well, they obviously have, the letter of denial, which created the numbers, came from the town. We didn't create the number. They did. They provided the calculation. They looked at it. The town issued the letter of denial. We didn't issue the letter of denial.
So, and just because it's a requirement, the code says, and I'm not going to out-lawyer you, but it's 19862. It says, such calculations shall be subject to the review and approval of the Director of Planning, and they have a check, we just had one, and that's the normal way we do it, and that's how we come up. I'm not saying you're wrong, but the size of the buildable square foot, your footprint is determined based, if the grade was really 25%, which I, as a layperson, I think it's higher than 10 or 15. You might have a smaller footprint, you might not, but normally it's the planning board.
We're not asking for footprint relief, Mr. McGrath.
Well, because we don't know.
But you're not the judge. If we were asking for it, then we would need a variance. We're not asking for it.
I have a professional engineer's attestment. You just said it was 10 to 15% grade. As
No, I said it's
I've heard-
over 10 to 15%.
But there's categories. The way the
I
steep
understand
slope,
that.
the way the steep slope code works, you could be over 25%. If you go over 25%, the rules of what you can build are different. So all I'm asking you is, do you have what the first applicant had, which is the basic checklist? You're asking for a lot more relief, 400, 500%. The first applicant was barely asking for any. He had the normal checklist. I'm just asking you, does your client have that?
We submitted what was required to the planning department in order for them to issue the letter of denial. The engineer certified to it.
Okay, so you do not have the documentation?
With
for the
me,
plan? Okay, that's fine.
I don't have the checklist that you're referring to. With me, no. I
okay.
didn't submit it, the engineer did.
Yeah, I mean, if we had it, I don't want to dwell on it. To me, it's a big thing that we get an independent check. And
It's actually insulting, really. It really is insulting
Don't be insulted.
I'm insulted from the engineer, I'm insulted from the planning department. I think that what you're asking for is insulting.
As you said, the first set of houses, when I went up that street, I have no idea how they got down the street last weekend in the snow, okay? It was built before steep slope. We all know what happened in 2005, although you don't like the law. It came in because they didn't want to see houses wedged into hillsides, okay? So I don't know if 2005 it would have been approved, but it was approved, okay? Now you have an entire, even steeper, higher up, on a road, I literally don't know how you can get up and down, okay? And one of the reasons they did this code, I think it was Mark Cuthbertson, who was the guy behind it originally, it passed unanimously. One of the things is, and this is sort of unrelated to what I just said, is to safeguard the lives and the welfare, to provide means of ingress and egress, or how do you get in and out of there? So like my next question when I drove up there was, I don't know if it's Centerport or Greenlawn Fire Department, has somebody from Centerport Fire Department actually seen this, you know, what you're proposing?
I don't know. They probably will have to see it when it goes to the building, through the building department process, yeah.
Okay, but you know, because right there, the whole intent of this legislation is to take an extra hard look and sometimes prohibit building on certain grades. And so,
With all due respect, I think you're taking a legislative function that you don't have the authority to do, and you're making statements that are completely inaccurate and making suppositions that you don't have the ability to know or make.
I didn't create the code. I know you don't like it, so.
It's not a question of what
Yes.
I like. You're putting yourself in the place of the town board. You're making assumptions about what was the intent of the ordinance was, and you're talking about something that happened 17 years ago, and you're making the determination of what you think it means.
Okay, I'm just reading from the code, and it says, I need something from the planning department to attest to your numbers. I can't just trust you, and you don't have that document. For me, that's a problem. But
Okay.
enough.
Agreed.
Well, I'd like to ask this question.
Go ahead.
Mr. McGrath made reference to the prior applicant that there was a checklist that came from the planning department. Does the planning department do this on a routine basis, and do we have one? Was it overlooked, or is it available?
I think the denial on this, Mr. Chairman, came from Building and Engineering. So they set the jurisdictional predicate for what's in front of us tonight.
So the one with Mr. Dunham was from the Building and Engineering Department,
I believe so.
Okay.
not from the Planning Department? Okay, so the Building and Engineering Department is what provided with the denial letter and was specific as to the statutes that you're seeking relief for. True?
Our letter came from Engineering Services. It was signed by Joe Corcione, Building Permits Examiner.
So in other words, that was the determination that Building made insofar as the relief that was necessary for this application.
Based upon the engineered plan that was submitted by Mr. Fowler's office.
See, the thing that I'm interested in hearing is you indicated in your application that you're not seeking any relief from the steep slope ordinance itself.
No.
Your relief has to do with the retaining walls.
I didn't say I'm not seeking any relief from the steep slope ordinance. I'm saying I'm not seeking any other relief from the steep slope ordinance for footprint of the size of the structure. The only relief we're seeking is for the retaining walls, that is part of the steep slope ordinance.
Okay, so the only relief you're asking for is the retaining walls.
That's correct.
Mr. Breslin, you're not seeking any relief at all on the footprint for this structure?
We are not.
Okay. And is the relief you're seeking, does it comport with the relief that the Building and Engineering Services Department determined you needed?
That's correct. Which solely for the retaining walls. In the building department's review of it, our footprint complied with the requirements as they determined.
I think the distinction is that we do see applications on occasion written up by planning This is a letter of denial, though, that issued out of Building and Engineering Services.
And I really don't want to keep harping on this. The code says that the director of planning has to sign off on it, and it wouldn't normally, like the last application, who cares? But I don't know that we've ever granted retaining walls 500% greater than what the town ordinance allows. I think they passed the ordinance, okay, based on the way they wrote the description, because they thought a certain amount of retaining walls you could build, we understand. I don't know that we've ever granted 500%. We maybe did one or two, and that's a concern. It's not like retaining walls don't count. It's included in the legislation. It says you should have 445. You have 2,200. That whole entire top of the mountain is going to be blocked off. And then I'll leave it alone.
All right. Any other questions from board members?
Mr. Breslin, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was up there this morning, and I just have some basic background questions. It would be my estimation that there are 3 houses up there. 2 of them appear to be for sale. They're on the same side of the street as the 2 proposed lots to be built upon. Are they owned by the current developer?
Yeah, I can find out. I don't know.
Okay, just as a matter of background. And then number 5 is across the street from them. And number 5 has, as I assume, was behind putting a sign at the current termination of the road that says that that's parking for number 5. And I don't know if that was by way of agreement or whatever, but obviously that dead end's not going to be there anymore. And I'm just asking the question with respect to extending the road. But my guess is it's probably an older map. Would you know when the map was filed?
Oh, the original map is the map of Shorewood that goes back into the 30s, I believe.
Okay. I mean, this depends on the rules, regulations, and the procedures and policies of each municipality. But oftentimes, when maps get a little long in the tooth, oftentimes a planning department will take a look at it and dust it off to see if there's anything that is sufficiently substandard that should be addressed so that the developer doesn't have any problems, or he may need more relief or more aid from the municipality. So I think in furtherance of Mr. McGrath's question, I would like to ask the planning department, did the planning department take a look at this finish out of the last 2 lots of this map in terms of maybe dusting off the requirements that they would be there for the road and any other treatments with respect to turnarounds or things of that nature?
Do you have a microphone, Tony?
And I don't know whether it's true or not. I'm just asking.
Just to remind the board, for residential developments, like we're looking at now for single lots, those denial letters are drafted in the Building and Engineering Department, and they only consult with us if they think they have an issue or a question. So I am assuming that the information, as Mr. Breslin spoke about, in the denial letter was factual.
Okay.
I mean, they're the ones that do the determination. So and if they do have certain questions, they'll come up for us for a consultation.
Okay, so
we do all of the reports on the special use permits, on the subdivision type, but something like this goes straight to the building department.
Okay, no, that's fine, but let me ask you this question then in furtherance of that. It's well known that the zoning board can utilize other assistance within the municipality when need be, but specifically it's often mentioned in the state code about consulting planning, and you've got a stellar group there. And in a case like this, might the board avail themselves of the opinion of a planning review just so that listen, Mr. Breslin here is advocating for his client, and it's been our experience he does a great job of that. And what we do for our part is to try and give him a piece of paper without it being excessive, but a piece of paper that's clean enough that he doesn't have any problems when he leaves here. So that's really the background behind some of these questions. It's not an attempt to find any fault with what's being proposed before us, but we want to make sure that to the degree that the board can, that we dot the i's and cross the t's. So I don't know. I'm not going to put you on the spot. It's just a question. I would. My further questions might be, Mr. Breslin, do you happen to know what the amount of the volume of earth is that would be removed once these retaining walls are in place?
I do not know, but going back to your original question, with respect to the road and what would be done there, that would in these types of lots, that's usually a direct discussion with the highway department on what has to be done and how that's done. With the individual lots, so that would be something that would directly be done with highway and their engineer.
No, certainly, but we often sometimes get letters from the planning department when they do weigh in on something again.
No, I understand, but the answer to your question is I don't know how much dirt that would be done, but I do know one of the things that when you design houses like this in hillside, oftentimes the house is used as part of the retaining structure, as you know.
Sure.
And in this particular design, as I explained it in the early part, the engineer in Mr. Fowler's office designed it in such a way to minimize the impacts in the hillside by creating the one, if you will, box for the development. And unfortunately, we don't have the image where it shows that the two houses together in the box. So when you have that, you see that all of the area around it that is not disturbed outside of the retaining walls. So you're concentrating on it.
Okay, I can imagine what that would be like when I look at the left half. Yeah, you can see it in the left half and the right. If you would like to, since it's not on display tonight, would you like to add that to the record?
I think it would be a good thing for the board.
Okay, and we can pass it around as well, Mr. Breslin. Do we have a exhibit number? Okay, Exhibit 15. Anybody on the board that would like to take a look at it? I think it's helpful. I have a bit of a background in this, so when I look at the mirror image, I can put it together. But I think that is helpful, Mr. Breslin. The extension of the road that would make possible creating this flat spot, obviously. Your client can't build unless he flattens it off, right? So you got to have some usable area around the house. So we understand the need for it. I see on the plan that these particular arrangements that have been put before us were based on a test boring from 2013. Not that we have to review the engineering here, but I guess the question I would have regarding the proposal that we have before us, I think applicants are always in a tough position because they don't want to spend a tremendous amount of money doing a full set of designs because they want to make sure they get their approvals first. So sometimes it can be somewhat iterative. But to that end, are there any other drawings that are available, either sections or details of the proposed wall that may exist?
I'm not aware, but I'll ask.
If you wouldn't mind finding out.
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
Mr. Breslin, what's the nature of the materials of the retaining wall that'll be built?
I think it's indicated on the plan, but I think it's, I think they're masonry, Mr. Chairman. I'll confirm that. Block.
It's a dry stack block,
Dry stack block.
probably with a geotechnical fabric.
Exactly.
Any estimation, again, until somebody does the detailed design on it, it's difficult, but any estimation of what the overcut's going to be for these walls, how far back into the hill to provide the proper tension in the fabric?
I don't think they've gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
But it'll have to pass muster with the engineering department, true?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions from board members? I have an indication that someone in our audience named Ms. Levine would like to be heard on this matter.
Good evening. First, let me say I'm very out of my realm here. I live at 58 Mead Drive, which is at the corner of
If you want to take your mask down, you're able to.
Thank you. And I'm just here because when I received this in the mail, what struck me was that there's not one singular appeal involved in this. For each lot, there were 3 or 4. Building walls with 0 feet back from the property line. So that makes sense at the top of the hill. But at the bottom, on the westerly section, that would be on top of, that would literally be on the property line of the house just above me. That house is currently not owned. It's for sale. I can't see anyone appreciating that. My concerns have to do with just the amount of retaining wall. I moved to Centerport because it's beautiful and very hilly. And I have woods in my backyard. And now I'm going to have these monstrous structures. When I look
Excuse
at the
me, Vincent, if you don't mind, could you find the speaker's lot? Okay.
I'm down at the corner, yes. My concerns are just as in a normal neighbor, the building, what the structures will look like. What struck me when Mr. Dunham came up and spoke to you this evening is he said, in consideration of our neighbors. I don't think there's consideration of neighbors in this building, in this appeal request. And so I would just like to go on record that it doesn't sound great to me. I would like it, I don't want 4 times the amount of retaining wall that's allowable to be approved. I can't see how that would do anything for my neighborhood. Ale Court is challenging already for parking. I can't imagine what any kind of construction up there would be. And I know our neighbors across the street on the bottom of Ale Court submitted concerns that are similar. So I hope those are discussed. That's from Andrew DiNatale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard with respect to this application? Mr. Breslin, any further comments?
You had asked me, someone had asked a question about the houses, if they were owned by Mr. Porco or his companies. The 2 houses that had the for sale signs on the street are owned by Mr. Porco. I have nothing further.
Okay, any further questions from the board?
Well, I obviously defer to whatever the chair would like to do in terms of whatever we would find dispositive on this. For my own edification, and as is often sometimes suggested in the guides, to avail yourself of a maybe more holistic review of this, that may or may not be within the purview of the zoning board per se, but it gives a holistic approach to, as the neighbor just commented. Myself, I think, would find it very edifying to get an opinion from the planning department. It's not something, typically we see the planning department, we work very closely with them in commercial efforts, and it is not usual for them to get involved in residential matters such as this, especially with such an old map. But they're very, very talented people, and they are always making recommendations to us. And I think I would just find that helpful if
Mr. President, we're going to reserve decision, and we'll make a decision next week on February 10th.
Okay, thank you very much.